Hey, everybody. Welcome to EverydayFI, where we explore the lives of everyday people pursuing financial independence. I'm your host, Meghan Combs, and I'm here to tell you that you do not need $1 million book deal or a famous blog to reach FI early. By talking with real humans, I'll show you how you can forge your own path to financial freedom the everyday way. So today on the show, I have an anonymous guest, and I love it when people are anonymous because we get to pick really fun pseudonyms. And today I'm going to be talking with Willow, which is fun because I don't know if anybody else is a Buffy fan, but I love Willow Rosenberg from Buffy, so I love that name. Willow, how are you? And why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm an American, but I am currently living abroad. I am from Spokane, Washington, and moved from there to Seattle and lived there for a huge number of years. I have in total lived abroad about 7.5 years.
Wow, that's incredible. What prompted you to move abroad?
Well, my husband and I were looking for an opportunity to move abroad, and I kept telling him just in 3 more years, we're going to move abroad, even though I had no plan, nothing, but just prepared for it to happen. And we got an opportunity through a company that both my husband and I were working through. And then the second time moving abroad, my husband got an opportunity. And so yeah, that's how we made it abroad. And I'm currently living just outside of Amsterdam in the Netherlands.
Ooh, that's really fun. My aunt lives in Bund, but it's near Maastricht. So that's awesome. So did you already know that your husband's company was going to offer these kinds of opportunities when you said, hey, let's look for opportunities to move abroad? Or was that just kind of fate or kismet or something like that?
I think it's the case of if you look for something, you will find it. So the first time that we got the opportunity to move abroad, we kept asking, okay, I'd like to go work for this company. Is there opportunities to be moving abroad? So that's how the opportunity came about the first time, where we could both be working abroad. And then the second time, it was a case of, again, continue to ask different people if there's any opportunities at a new company. Are they willing to hire someone that's from the US and help them move over? So yeah, it worked out.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's helpful for people who maybe are like, I would like to live abroad, but I don't know how to do that. Yeah, so that's why I was asking. And so why do you want to live abroad?
I've always been fascinated with different cultures and different ways of living. And I think living abroad exposes you on a day-to-day way to just different ways of thinking, different ways of living. And I think the other thing too is having a new home position to travel to different places, because I would say that's one of my hobbies is traveling. And so that gives you a new hub for traveling.
Yeah, that's it. It's very true. If you're smack dab in the middle of Europe, you can go all over Europe and see so many different kinds of cultures, right? It's not quite the same in the US, where if you go from North Carolina to Colorado, it's not really that much of a culture change. Sure, you get some mountains and some maybe more outdoorsy people, but it's still America, right? So yeah, I love that.
It is true, but I've been a consultant for 20 years. And as I said, I like traveling. I chose consulting because I wanted to travel as part of my job. And I would say that I've traveled to a number of places within the US and Canada and worked at a lot of different companies because I was consulting for them, that the culture difference between, say, a nonprofit in San Francisco is quite different than working at a place in Mississippi where they're doing manufacturing, right? So there is a big company culture difference and even the ways of living that you can find and see those nuances as you travel the US.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. And yeah, because it's something where you can find that change and the different way of people living right in your backyard, so to speak. So, yeah, I'm glad you pushed back on that because I guess I'm also just jealous that you're living in Europe. So,
We have plenty to do in the US for sure.
yes, definitely. And Canada. Yeah, Canada is beautiful. And you have South America and Central America right there too. That's very different culturally. So, yeah, you're right. So, what made you want to move to Amsterdam? Was that just where the company took you, so you didn't really have a choice, or was that specifically an area you guys wanted to live?
That was where the job opportunity came up. So we weren't specifically looking for the Netherlands. In fact, I kept thinking about it in my mind as Holland, but then that's the opportunity that came up. And yeah, I think it's also interesting because my family has some Dutch heritage, so it's also interesting to learn a little bit about that as well.
So, is it just you and your husband, or do you have a family? Did you move your family there as well?
It's my husband and myself and my son, who is now 16. I think he started fourth or fifth grade when we moved here, and now he's a sophomore in high school.
Yeah, awesome. And how did he feel about the move going from Seattle to Amsterdam? I'm assuming you landed in Amsterdam immediately.
I actually have a little bit of a different story there. Yeah. The first time we moved abroad, we moved from Seattle to India. Now, I would say that's a bigger shock for my son. Since we moved and we had rented out our house, we moved back to the US very briefly and moved to New Mexico, and then got the job opportunity after we'd been to New Mexico for a year. And so then we moved to the Amsterdam area. And I would say that wasn't a huge shocker for our son because he'd already seen Seattle, seen India, seen New Mexico, and then now the Netherlands. So it's maybe the middle of the road, if you will, closer to Seattle.
Yeah. And so, how did you acclimate your son to moving to these exotic places? If somebody's listening to this and thinking, oh, I can't do that because I have a family and they're in school and I don't want to upend them, what advice would you give to somebody who maybe is having those kinds of limiting thoughts when it comes to living abroad?
Yeah, I think it does feel that way. I do feel that when they are in elementary school, that it's maybe a bit easier to move. The experiences that he had, like in India and New Mexico, and he's bringing to his classes in the Netherlands, he brings them up. He says, Mom, having the perspective of what I saw and experienced in India really helps with the discussions that we have in the classroom. So having those kinds of things, and you may not know that that will be really good for your child moving, but those are the kinds of things that you might not think about would be really helpful, especially in this global world. So I think there's more of the line of thought can be, how can I raise a global citizen in the world that is always changing? There's lots of things to think about, but that's probably a good way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I have so many questions. So thank you for answering all of them. But I was curious how enrolling him in schools worked. I'm guessing Amsterdam might have been a little bit easier than India, but how did you find a school for him in India?
Well, I would say for most expats that are living abroad, it's more of looking at what international schools are available. So I would say when we moved to India, we thought we might only be there for a year. And then in our scenario, it ended up being a year. So if you're only going to be there for a year, having an international school and looking to see what the options of those sort of limits already the schools that you would be looking at. So I think when we moved to India, there was only three. And of the three, there was kind of the clear winner. It was quite a large city, but there's not a lot of international people living there. So it was pretty easy to narrow down that. So it's filling out the forms, talking with people. I think that's relatively easy. I took the same approach when we moved to the Netherlands is, okay, where is my husband's work? What are the options of international schools that are in the range of where my husband's work is? And then I think there was three of them. And the price difference between them and then looking at the school, I think just solidified it for us. I don't think the school is a hard thing to find or do. I wanted to have something like Montessori style, but I had to kind of abandon that when I saw there was nothing in India.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But is it common to have international schools like that in a lot of countries? I'm thinking of the US and I'm like, are there schools like that here? Because it's not something I would look for, right? But maybe there are. And so I was wondering if it's not common here, is it common everywhere else? And we just don't know about it as Americans.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I don't know if I can think of international schools in the US. I think more like private schools is maybe the alternative. It's just termed as international because they usually speak English there. So I've met a man who grew up in Dubai. I think he's Scottish, but he speaks American English. And it's because he was at an international school in Dubai. So I think international schools is quite common in a lot of other countries where English may be a language that's spoken, but not as common. So that when people move there, there's more commonality for international expats.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That makes sense. Thanks. Okay. So going back to your motivation for wanting to live abroad, growing up, did you live abroad as a child? Did your parents travel a lot? What initiated this love of wanting to travel and live abroad and experience the world?
Growing up, I always lived in the same place. So I lived there for 17 years, basically in the same neighborhood. When I was younger, what I really wanted to do was travel internationally, go and explore different countries. I didn't have a thought where I want to live abroad. I started to think about living abroad a little bit later, maybe 10 or 12 years into my career. And I think it was more around that idea because I was traveling a lot for consulting. It was more around what if I lived in these places that I'm visiting? And I felt I could move anywhere in the US if I wanted to, but wouldn't it be more interesting to have a new hub for travel somewhere else? Yeah, it wasn't something when I was a kid I thought I wanted. It kind of grew as I experienced life, I guess.
Yeah, that's cool. That makes sense. How does pursuing financial independence allow you to pursue this kind of travel, would you say?
So I think definitely when we get into discussions about how I got into FI, we'll give some more info there. But in general, I would say because I did that, I was able to reach FI much quicker. So as we see with the geo arbitrage, as we see with the house hacking, all those things were strategies that I accidentally fell into because I made the choices of wanting to live abroad. So I think the decisions that you make sometimes don't understand the full impact of them, and then you're pleasantly surprised later. So hopefully that answers your question in a way.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And yeah, it's giving a little nugget for people to continue listening to the episode because I'm not going to ask you follow ups on that quite yet. Cool. Okay. So let's talk about your money origin story a little bit. So when you were growing up and everything, what would you say is one of your earliest money memories?
So my dad's a CPA and he's very focused on numbers. And for our allowance, we had a little notebook and we'd write down what our allowance is. I get $2.50 and the date that I get it. And so it's like a little ledger. And I just remember, okay, anytime we deal with money stuff, we pull out the little ledger and write everything down. That is the experience and the memories that I have, knowing that it's something that you write down and you track. And I would say it's almost that power of writing things down where they tell you to write your goals down. So having that little notebook was like an Excel spreadsheet today, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. So, would you say that you are a budgeter? You track your budget today the same way that you did when you were younger, write it all down in your spreadsheet?
I do keep track of budget, but I try and be a little bit loose on it because I've sort of deterred myself from being too frugal. So it's more of I like to see what the numbers are, but I don't feel like I have to stick to the numbers. So having them there and knowing that it's available for me to look at for a tedious level is maybe a comforting thing.
Yeah, for sure. I'm the same way that I've never found budgeting to be that useful because it's almost like, okay, you set a budget, but then if you go outside of it, there's no going back and there's nothing stopping you from going outside of it, really. Maybe other people do this, but for me, if my grocery budget is $300 a month, which it's not, but let's just say I'm not adding up everything at the grocery store and making sure that I'm exactly on the line of three, right? I see it, but then on the other hand, I don't want no insight into my money. I always look at the spending tab in budgeting apps. So I use Monarch and I don't ever look at the budget tab. I only look at the spending tab because then it tells me, okay, what did I do? And where can I improve next month going forward? And it's okay. So I spent a little bit too much here. So let's calm down next month with that. And what are some tactics I can take to do that? So yeah, I'm with you there.
I think I've heard or read somewhere that the experts tell you to budget, but the experts don't actually budget. So I was like, why are they telling me to do something they don't even do? How is that even a strategy?
Yeah, that's why I'm like, knowing where your money's going is good, but trying to budget, it's not the same as if there was some way that your card could say, oh, you've hit your grocery budget for this month. You can't spend any more on food. If it was like that, that would be a little different, but it's not.
Yeah, it's not.
So back to your money story. So how would you say your parents talked about money in your household, or did they talk about money?
My dad being a CPA, things would come up here and there. I remember my mother saying, air quote, that costs money. Meaning if I asked, oh, so-and-so said they're going to go to the Nutcracker for Christmas, her response would be, that costs money. And any choice that you make, is there a financial impact to it? Yes or no, right? That is part of this story. But then I think my parents would talk about money here or there. So a topic my dad would bring up, like, oh, it's better to buy a car rather than lease a car, because at the end of it, you have a car that's been paid off and you don't have to make monthly payments. So those little topics would come up. I think another thing that touched between my parents talking about money as well as kind of money memory is my dad would talk about the stock market here and there. He was interested in it. And then for one Christmas, he gave a Washington Mutual stock to me. I don't remember how much it was, probably a couple hundred or something. But then probably within 4 months, they went bankrupt. Who cares about the 200 or how much ever it was? To me, it's special that my dad knew that I cared about that and gave that to me as a Christmas gift. So I just remember it. And I remember that they went bankrupt and I just like experiencing that. I think that's an interesting thing. So as I was telling you about with that costs money, when I got into high school, I was in a Japanese class. I think maybe in my second year, they talked about going to Japan. And so then I came home and I'm like, oh, I want to go to Japan with my Japanese class. And then guess what their response was? That costs money. And so then here I am, all very distraught that I can't go because I don't have whatever, how much ever it costs. I'm sure it costs $1,500 or something with the plane ticket. And I think that's a month or so that they were going. And then something happened where they couldn't do the trip that year. They moved the trip one full year. And so then I'm sitting there thinking, well, they won't let me go because it costs money. And then I'm asking, what if I got a job and paid for the trip. Can I go then? And they're, oh, yeah, of course, if that's what you want to do. And so that's the first thing I did. Promptly got a job, spent the full year getting money, and then used my money for that. So to me, that whole tying in of being financially independent, of I can make my own money, I can choose whatever I want to do with it, became super important for me and ingrained based off the way that my parents talked about things, and then knowing that I could do it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because it sounds like the interpretation of that costs money was that costs money, so we can't do it. Is that right? Is that kind of what she was thinking of? How did you interpret that as a child?
The way I would interpret it more is that what we want to spend our money on, because my parents had money. So we went to Hawaii. I remember going to Florida. We're from Washington State. So going to Florida costs some money. We had trips every summer that we would go and do different things. So we had money. It was more around, is that the way that we want to spend the money? And so we need to think about that activity costs money. Is that what we want to use it on? That to me is how I would interpret it, because it was okay for me to spend the money on the trip, but you have to think through the process.
Yeah. And it's probably good that parents didn't just say, oh, that costs money and we'll pay for it for you. Because if they had done that, then you wouldn't have gotten the job and you wouldn't have understood the money and what it takes, and then lead you into that FI mindset early on. So yeah, it's almost a good thing that it was postponed and all those little things aligned to make you more FI. I'm sure you would have probably found it anyway. It sounds like you were in a money conscious family, and you said you were interested in stocks and things, and that's why your dad gave it to you for Christmas. But still, that's really cool that it all kind of lined up.
Yeah, I think it lined up how it could help me later in life. So I think for sure that's a way that the upbringing definitely shaped my philosophy on money and tying my independence with and choices that I could make based off of making money.
Yeah, that's awesome. Which was, of course, my next question was how your upbringing shaped your philosophies as an adult around money. Is there any more you want to say about that, though?
I can't really think of anything. I do feel like it tied together. I really feel like that trip, me working the summer and knowing what it takes to do things, helped realize if I want to travel, I just make money and then I can travel wherever I want.
Yeah, for sure. Let's move into your FI journey. How did you find the financial independence, like movement, the concept of FI, Mr. Money Mustache, Choose FI? How did you find it, and what drew you into this specific type of financial education?
So I'm a big consumer of financial literature, I would say, and was always checking out books from the library in the late 90s, early 2000s on financial literature. A lot of that financial literature back then was either really based around saving and frugality, or it was pure stock investment info. There wasn't the plethora of what we have today with FI podcasts. So my early 20s, there wasn't really a lot of FI type info. I actually didn't turn or accept anything from the sort of FI community until maybe May of 2024. I may have heard on the periphery the RE part of FIRE, and I wasn't really that interested in the RE part. I enjoyed being a consultant. I enjoyed working. I also knew that there was a bit of the frugality. Maybe I heard about it early on, and I read enough of those books. I knew what that was. That wasn't really my interest. So I found it in May of 2024 and maybe was more ready to hear it because I read J.L. Collins' book. I read that in a social media post and, oh, I like financial literature. So I read the J.L. Collins Simple Path to Wealth. And I felt, hey, this is a much easier book than the book that my father recommended to me in 2014, which was the John Bogle book, the Little Book of Common Sense Investing, I think is what it's called. You got to be interested in financial literature to read that book. So the J.L. Collins is a really good summarized version of that. So after reading J.L. Collins, I was more interested to hear what other people's thoughts or strategies were. And that led me to consuming all of the Mad Scientist's podcasts. He's got some great podcasts. And so I would listen to one of his podcasts and read the book and then listen to some of the things that he had to say about it. So I think that allowed me to see the experience of what people were going through with the journey. And I think to me, that was a much more interesting story than rushing to something that is retire early.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know the RE throws a lot of people off. And so I think that's why we've all changed to FI instead of FIRE. Although the RE is still on my mind. That's my goal. It's funny because when we think of working, I don't think of doing this podcast as working, which of course I would continue doing if I quit my job, but it is work, right? I'm not making tons of money or anything, but I'm making a little bit here and there, and it is work, but it's fun and engaging, and I love making plans for it. I teased a little bit. I'm sure these episodes will have come out by the time yours comes out, but having the tactical episodes, adding those on with David Robinson, that was just something that I think I was listening to one of my older episodes because I sent it to my boss and I wanted to make sure it was kosher because he was interested. And I was like, let's make sure this episode is one that was probably good to send him. And so I was listening to it and I was like, oh, I mentioned in there that I want to do tactical episodes. I should do that. I'm going to plan that. And I was way more excited about that than my job. So I guess I think of RE as like quitting corporate work or quitting having to work, right? And so I'm wondering, is that kind of how you think of it too? And even if you enjoy your job, what is your purpose of pursuing financial independence? If you enjoy working, what's the point for you?
It's the choice freedom. So if I want to work, then I can. If I don't want to, then I don't have to. Or if I don't like the way the company's going that I'm working for, then I can choose not to work or to have a real easy way out to move to maybe another company and not have to worry about it.
Yeah. And that's a great way to look at it. And that's what I tell people when they're like, well, I don't want to retire. I like working. And I'm like, yeah, you like working now, but what if your company changes? What if your boss changes? What if there's a layoff? And if you're financially independent, then those things are not going to be as scary. And I tend to say this to people who are in their 20s and 30s. And I'm like, who knows what you're going to want to do in your 40s and 50s? You might want to be like, I think I'm done working and I want to retire earlier than normal, but you don't have to retire at 30. But yeah, retiring at 55 is still retiring early, right? It's solid 10 years early. So,
and I would say that the company I'm working for did have a layoff, or they were doing, because it's a British company. We went through 2 rounds and I was definitely much more relaxed, I think, than other people. They were very concerned about losing their job. And I felt like, well, if it happens, it happens. It was meant to happen. Otherwise, I'm not going to worry about it.
Yeah, that's nice. That relaxation, that freedom to be like, yeah, if this is not working out, I can find something else and I can take my time doing it. It's nice. I like that you're like choice freedom. I heard that as like, I choose freedom. And that's why I like that. So cool. So do you think that you might continue working until you're 65, 70, or is there a time when you think, okay, maybe I'll take a step back and travel more or anything like that?
My son's in an international school, and that doesn't come without its bills. And I've made this choice for my son to go to an international school. And I think it's too late for him to say move over to, say, a Dutch school or something like that. And so after his 3 years, we'll probably do what Jillian's podcast, Retire Often. So I think we'll probably do a mini retirement or mini sabbatical or some sort after our son graduates in roughly 3 years. I'm not opposed to not taking some time off. So I think that will happen.
That's awesome. Do you have plans for this mini sabbatical?
My plan is this year, 2026, to start doing some preparation for it because my son's got 3 years, so I'm not too overly excited about it. I think she's got a book that was coming out, or maybe it came out last month or something. So I'll take a look at that and maybe start going through some of the process that she has laid out in there.
Yeah, I've read it. It's so funny that we're talking about this right now because her episode is actually coming out on my podcast on Monday. We are recording this on Saturday, and it came out November 3rd and also the 10th. I split her episode up, and I got the chance to read her book early, and it's super good. I definitely recommend it to people. And of course, I'll link her website, podcast, book, all of that in the show notes. She's also hilarious. Every time I've heard her on other podcasts, I'm like, oh, she seems so calm and serene and gentle. And then I talk to her and she is all those things, but then she's also hilarious. I was, oh my God, you deliver jokes so, like just chef's kiss. They're just so beautifully delivered because it's just deadpan and it's, oh, she's great. So I'm excited for everybody to hear that episode. Of course, it will be out by the time this one comes out. I'll make sure to link her episode so people can easily find it. So we teased the audience a little bit about the traveling helped you reach FI quicker because you did some hacks and things like that. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I would say is by the time I found the FIRE movement, I had realized that I was already accidentally FI. And part of it is I didn't know because I didn't know this 4% or 25 times your expenses. I didn't know any of those number things. So I realized, okay, I could consider myself CoastFI because I don't need to invest anymore because of the information that I learned from the FI community. So looking back, I've read a lot of financial literature, but it's not a lot about these strategies that you hear on financial podcasts. Just like an example with an accidental strategy that I didn't know that I use is Bigger Pockets always talks about using some kind of house hack or something like that. Well, I didn't realize that when I moved with a company to another country that they were going to pay for our living expenses and our transportation expenses when we were living in India. And then we had rented out our house in the US. So now I don't have a mortgage payment that I'm paying. Now I'm not paying for transportation costs. That's the first time I had retirement accounts, but this was the first time that I found that I could open up an individual brokerage account and had money left over from these things. That was like, okay, I have to do something with it. And so that's an accidental strategy that I found. I didn't know that that was a strategy till I heard about it later, right? And living in India is definitely geo arbitrage. In the US, I had my cell phone bill. I don't know, it was 60 to 80 a month. When I moved to India, it was $5 a month. So I was just like, okay, this is very different, right? So some of the geo arbitrage is real. Depending on where you move and you live at, it can be a real impact on saving money in your account. So other kind of accidental things that happen too is when we moved to India, now we are landlords because we rented out our property and it's been rented out for 8 years. And I didn't know we were going to be doing that. And it's kept the equity in our house and made it so that our net worth is a lot higher than if we had sold our house before we left, right? Another thing that happened, although it has nothing to do with living abroad, I think I mentioned that my father had mentioned to me to read the Little Book of Common Sense Investing. And I listened to him and I read the book. And as soon as I got done with that book in 2014, I took all of my retirement accounts. I opened up a brokerage account, put them all in index funds. And it was like I read it in the book, but they didn't say VTSAX or give specific ones. It just said low cost index funds. So I looked around and picked ones that made sense. And now here I am in 2024 and I look at it and it's now been 10 years. And I'm like, oh, I guess I did get VTSAX on accident.
Yeah, 2024, you open up Simple Path to Wealth and you're like, oh yeah, I have that one. That's funny.
When I read the J.L. Collins book, I was like, yep, I already believe this. I'm already looking at my index funds. It is triple the amount that it was when I first opened up the account.
Yeah, that's amazing. And Bogle, John, he was similar to JL Collins. He preaches the same thing. That's why the Bogle heads are basically adjacent to the FI community and the overlap, right? They give really good advice because they're super into the index fund thing. Yeah, it's a really awesome that your dad gave you that book. I wish I had read something like that in 2014 because I think in 2014 I had thousands in credit card debt, and student loan debt, and negative net worth. Living on a prayer in New York City. Yeah, so that's awesome.
My husband and I were just talking today about student loan debt. And I was telling him, probably just because of my upbringing, the first thing I wanted to do as soon as I got out of going to the university was pay off my student loan debt. Now, this is before huge amount of student loan debts that we see today, but I remember I was so focused on it that I paid it off in 2.5 or 3 years. And I was just like, now I'm done with that. Now I can focus on other things. That's another story that reminds me. My father had opened up a brokerage account for me. I think my grandfather had left some money. So him being interested in investing, he put in 10K or something in it. And that's when I was 3 or 4. So he comes back to me when I'm thinking about going to the university. And he said, you could either take this money in this brokerage account or you could take a student loan. If you leave it in the brokerage account, it will likely grow, but it's your choice. You can do whatever you want. Now, the amount that was in that brokerage account probably would have fully paid for my school right then and there. And I thought, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I like stocks. Just leave it in the stock. What I heard was buy and hold. So I left it in the stock, got my own student loan, and then paid my student loan. And even still today, 40 years later, I do have that brokerage account and it's still in the original thing that my father had selected. And it is probably 10 to 15 times the amount, but it's been sitting there for almost 40 years at this point.
Yeah. And it's good that you did that because I don't know what the student loans interest rate was for you and whether or not you got government student loans, but I think within 5 years of each other. So it's probably similar, but it was 6 to 7%. And so it's like 6 of one, half dozen of the other type of thing where the investment would grow that much too, but you have the opportunity to have it in there for so long that why not just take the loan and then pay it off soon, right? That's one of those arguments with mortgages, right? Which is pay it off, don't pay it off. And a lot of people do it on vibes. They're like, oh, I hate debt, so I'm going to pay it off. And it's like, well, there's a third option though. There's the option of take that payment that you would put towards your mortgage, that would be the paying it off, put it in a brokerage, invest it, wait till it gets to a point where it could pay your mortgage off, and then pay your mortgage off with that. Probably you're not going to because you're going to see that growth and be like, no, I'm going to keep it in there. I'm going to keep it in there. But that's a really good third option because that amount of money will grow a lot faster than the interest you're probably paying on your house, right? And I know interest rates now are 6-7%, but it's still, the S&P 500 has grown between 12 and 15%. And in the last 10 years, it's like 12%, which is double that mortgage rate. So yeah, anyway, not to get on a tangent.
I would say from the student loan perspective, it gave me more motivation to make sure that when I got out of school that I was getting a job that would have enough money to start paying off my student loan debt. I think there was that motivation there. So in hindsight, I still feel it was a really good choice. I had options from my parents, right? And I think even today, people have 529 plans. And if you don't use your 529, it can roll into a Roth. So kids today still have that same kind of option. It's wrapped differently, but it's an option there for them as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad you brought that up because I think maybe that can be an episode that David and I do. So thanks for doing that. Yeah. Let's move into what are some of your current struggles or challenges you're going through right now? And what are some of your current wins that you want to share with us?
I would say current struggles. I think it goes to what we were just talking about with the 529 plan. How much money do you save for a child? Right. So I just told you about what I feel allowed me to gain responsibility and independence with the choices that I could make and then see the impact even 40 years later. Because it's unreasonable today, the amount of tuition and the room and board costs for school. So I want to save money, but I also want to make sure that there's motivation for my son to make some choices in his life to set him up for good independence. And I think there's the 529 that's kind of a struggle. And the other one is just sharing the FI information without being too overly parenty about it, right? But sharing in a way that allows him to understand the impact of his choices as he makes them on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. So, how are you approaching that? It might help some others because I'm sure other people are like, how do I talk to my teenager about this without sounding parenty? I'd love to hear your strategy.
To me, I think there's more to it than just money. It's overall approach with how you're discussing school. So I think the first thing is making sure that they have a plan when they get to school. Because when you get there and then somehow it turns into 5 and 6 years, make sure that you're like, okay, when you get to school, you have a plan. And so then we've talked a little bit about that in general. I told him, okay, when I got to school, one of the first things I did is I knew I wanted to go to business school. So I looked to see what credits were required and went through and had laid out my map. And then somehow later on in another discussion, he asks if my brother went to college. And I said, well, he did. But remember I was telling you about that roadmap that I was saying? He didn't really do that. So he's not really sure how much more he would need to finish. And so he got bored with that project and he didn't finish, right? So the whole point of going to the school is making sure you come out with a degree, right? So you want to help with the framing of the work and what is the goal, and then get into maybe that financial aspect. Be like, okay, well, we're willing to pay X amount, and so you can make your choice on the school, which we're going into those discussions a bit now, because he should be able to get some funding from the government since we've been living here for a number of years. And I'm now an EU permanent resident, and he is as well. So some of your funding can come from the government. And if you choose to go to the US, it's going to cost you a lot more. It's your choice, but you're going to have to make that difference up, right? So having those discussions, he's seeing the choices that he's making as well.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Great. Okay. What are your current wins right now?
I would say spending some time to make memories with my son, who's going to be moving on very soon. So we've done a number of trips in the last couple of months. So anytime he's getting some time off from school, I've been trying to spend time with him on travel and with my husband. In the past, when we first moved here, I was very excited about doing my hobby, which is aerial, and Ben was trying to do a lot of festivals and travel with aerial. And so now I've put that a little on the back burner, try and do some travel trips with my son. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Can you explain what Ariel is for the audience who might not know? And I'm obviously going to put your picture on the podcast show, but can you explain what it is in case anybody wants to look into it?
Yeah, I would say definitely look into it, especially if you have a dance or a gymnastics background. But yeah, aerials, you would see it in Circus LA, where people are doing things on a fabric, which would be aerial silk, or they're on a rope, so aerial rope or cordelice. And it's mainly things that are in the air and takes a lot of arm strength and flexibility to do trainings or performances.
Yeah, it looks really cool. I am not flexible, so there's no way I could do it. But I have two friends of mine who do acrobatics and they do shows and things like that. And mainly they do couples acrobatics and like yoga type of things. And they have classes at the gym that I go to. And they also do performances. And it's just so cool to see them do it. And I did one class with them. And this is so silly. I'm terrified of heights. So my husband and I kind of weigh the same because he's a smaller Asian man. He's 5'8" and he's 150 pounds. And I'm 5'4" and 140 pounds. So I got up on his shoulders and I was like, oh my God, is he going to be able to lift me? And I literally looked down at the ground and I was like, no, I was actually afraid of heights on his shoulders, which was hilarious. But luckily, he's so flexible that he just squatted down and let me just step off. And I was like, thank God. So I have not gone back to their class yet, but I love watching them. By the way, audience, don't let me deter you from doing this. It looks really cool. Again, look at the picture for the podcast cover. It looks really cool. And yeah, if you are interested in it, I would do it. It looks awesome.
When I first started, I could do nothing. And I had a gymnastics background of 12 years, although it'd been a number of years since I started aerial. And I've been doing aerial for about 10 years now. And I just absolutely love it. It's so challenging and gives me other things to think about other than work or being FI. So it's fun that way.
Yeah. That's awesome. Cool. Well, we are coming towards the end of our time, but before I let you go, I'd love it if you could leave our audience with a life hack or recommendation or some learning that you have had in your lifetime that they can take away and take action on today.
Yeah, I would say the life hack or the recommendation is ask for what you want. As I mentioned, I really wanted to live abroad and I was making room in my life for that. And when we were doing interviews, my husband and I were looking for a new job. We kept asking, is there an opportunity to move abroad? I see a company has offices in these other countries. Can we move there? Is there some opportunity? Can we create an opportunity? So it's knowing what you want and then asking for it and then continuing to look for it. So there's a lot of power in asking for what you want.
Yeah, that's awesome. Is there any strategies if somebody is afraid to ask what they want? Is there anything to get them over that mental hump that you would advise?
I think some of it is probably around the wording, how you're telling it to yourself in your mind. So if you're worried about asking for what you want, as the example with, I want to move abroad, can I ask someone at the company? I don't know. Start the conversation with, oh, I see that there's other offices in these other countries. Start some of the conversations. They can start to see that you're interested in that, right? That starts to open the conversation where you can start to ask more questions.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you so much. This has been great, Willow. I loved talking with you. Of course, I love your pseudonym, so I had to say it before we signed off again. And yeah, is there anything else that you'd like to say before we sign off?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. And I love hearing other people's stories. So I hope this story gives other people ideas of strategies and things to think about for how they want to live their life.
Yeah, I definitely think it did. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to the show. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit subscribe and leave a quick rating. Also, hit up my Patreon at patreon.com/EverydayFI podcast for ad-free and bonus content. I'm Meghan Combs, and I'll see you next time on Everyday Fi.